Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. We're very pleased to have with us Mr. Panos Moumtzis, the regional coordinator for the humanitarian crisis in Syria, who's here in town. As you know, it's a busy day concerning Syria, and he'll talk to you about the situation there. Mr. Moumtzis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm the regional humanitarian coordinator for the Syria crisis. I'm based in Amman, Jordan, where we really respond to the humanitarian needs inside Syria. I'm here on a very brief visit in New York. Maybe I should start, first of all, by describing the really very dramatic humanitarian situation that we see in Syria today. During the now 8th year of the conflict, the humanitarian situation in Syria today is the worst since the conflict has started. We're seeing massive displacement of people in all directions. On top of our concern is really issues related to protection of civilians. The fact that we consistently see Syrians living through a litany of horrors. On a daily basis, people go through atrocities of crimes, sieges, starvation, indiscriminate attacks against civilians, civilian infrastructure. And we have seen really this year quite an increase in terms of health facilities, hospitals, ambulances, being attacked in multiple locations, which is really a violation of international humanitarian law. The reported use of chemical weapons, forced displacement, reports on sexual violence, and really the list, I'm afraid, is quite long and it goes on. So this really creates, when we ask the Syrian people, what is your biggest need? Is it food? Is it health? What is it that you need? Constantly, the reply is the same. It's safety, it's protection. It's for us to make sure that we are safe, us and our loved ones, in terms of where we are. All these atrocities and violations have resulted to a displacement of more than 700,000 people since the beginning of the year. Ghouta, we see 700,000. In Ghouta, we have seen a massive movement. First of all, the people who got displaced in the 8 transit centers in Damascus, half of them have moved out. The humanitarian organizations have been providing life-saving assistance to them in these centers. We've also seen more than 55,000 people who left from Ghouta to Idlib as part of these green buses, the evacuations that have taken place on the ground. In Idlib itself, we have seen a displacement of more than 400,000 since mid-December that has resulted to a massive movement from southern Idlib towards central Idlib. Idlib is the most congested governorate in Syria. There is more than 2 million people who live there. And at the moment, we are really running out of places to host, to find shelter, to be able to receive more people. If this continues, including the hostilities and the offensive that is taking place in Idlib, we could potentially see 2 million people, which is the population of Idlib, right at the borders of Turkey, with tremendous pressure both to Turkey and further afield in terms of the impact on the ground. We have also seen more than 137,000 people who fled from Afrin to the south, to Tal Rifat area. There also there is a massive humanitarian response to help the people, the displaced people who were moved further south, but also through the cross-border operation to be able to bring the assistance in Afrin town, and assistance is as often not just the food and medical supplies, more importantly is protection by presence, is the mere presence that we are there to be able to help the people where they are. In Raqqa itself, we continue to see a lot of suffering, the biggest issue being the large number of unexploded ornaments. At its peak, we had 50 to 80 incidents of fatalities, casualties per week. And just to compare it, this is the same number as you get in Afghanistan over 1 year. So the Raqqa city still, despite the massive returns of more than 100,000 people who have gone back, the needs are enormous. And in particular, the biggest issue is really the presence of unexploded ornaments and landmines. Raqqa has been one of the most viciously mined city that we have seen in our operations. I don't think we have seen it anywhere else to that extent, inside houses, in neighborhoods, in streets, in many locations on the ground. So we have a massive emergency response on multiple fronts, and that's what makes it unprecedented. That we had Izruta in Damascus, in Idlib, in Raqqa, in Afrin. We've also seen displaced people out of Izruta arriving in the Euphrates Shield area, and also trying to cope with the needs. Imagine it's like having to relocate tens of thousands, a city overnight. And this comes on top of the 6.6 million internally displaced people that are in Syria, 5.5 million refugees in the neighboring countries, 13 million people in need. I mean, more than half the population of Syria has been displaced, and a massive needs on the ground. We often talk about the numbers and the millions that have moved, but really what is the most tragic, and many of us working on the front line of the humanitarian operations, is the individual stories. Behind each of this number, there is a family, there is a trauma, having lost a loved one, having had to leave one's home behind, and really starts with an impact that most probably will stay with these people for the rest of their lives. So I think this is something important not to forget as we're moving to the operation. Now, one of our biggest issues at this point of the year is really funding, and I do want to say a few words on that. As of today, we have received, out of a request for $3.5 billion to support the life-saving humanitarian assistance in Syria, we have received 513 million US dollars, which means that we are funded at 14.6%. This is the lowest we have been at this point of the year during the operation. 14.6%. So with the ongoing crisis, with a displacement of more than 700,000 people basically in the last 100 days, with the urgent life-saving interventions that are required in multiple locations, the current funding is highly insufficient. And I'm here on a trip, actually, that before coming to New York, I was in Washington. Yesterday, I was in Toronto. From here, I'm going to Riyadh. We're really reaching out to multiple capitals to make sure that the financial resources are put on the table, are provided to the operation to be able to provide the life-saving assistance. This includes all, of course, United Nations agencies, the international NGOs, and the Syrian NGOs. I want to particularly say 2 words about the Syrian NGOs, who are the ones who work really on the front line on delivery in multiple locations, often putting their lives under danger. And what we really want to make sure is that they have this bare minimum. People sometimes think that we are providing a comprehensive response. Actually, what we provide is a bare minimum to help people in life. And with 14%, that is not possible. From here, we're going to Brussels, where there will be the Syria conference on the 25th of April. And I really hope by then the financial commitments would have scaled up to a point where to enable us to be able to provide the life-saving assistance. Maybe I'll stop at that, and happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll turn to questions now. Yes, Pam.
Thank you. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. Thank you for the briefing. On the funding appeals, does that include, do you see cutbacks from certain countries or overall? And number 2, on the recent evacuations, do you see those being impeded and humanitarian aid going in being impeded or helped by short humanitarian pauses? Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. On the cutbacks, at the moment, the indication we have from most capitals is that they are processing their funding for Syria. And there is an indication that funding may be at the same level as last year. So we haven't had any capital come and say we are, drastically cutting. On the contrary, everybody, I think, is keen to make sure. And that's where really I wanted to come here, because I think we want the message to go out. There is sometimes this perception that, you know, the war on ISIL is over and therefore the humanitarian needs are over. And actually, inside Syria, the humanitarian needs are far from over. To the contrary, we see a peak, we see an escalation. Throughout, since last year and this year, we continue seeing an average of 8,000 Syrians per day, on average, every single day, becoming displaced. So it's a massive displacement. And that requires, in terms of capitals, what we're asking is for an early release of funds, an early announcement. Often the first quarter of the year is where governments, administrations internally are processing with their parliaments and finances and so on. So we really cannot wait. We really desperately need to get an early release of funding, flexible funding, to be able to adjust it to the evolving situation with this massive movement of people that is taking place. Ghouta was the operation where we really focus a lot. Idlib itself is going through a crisis. What is the end with Idlib? How far would it go? What would happen to the people there? We have put, as humanitarian actors, a robust, we had 5 different contingency plans in different locations of the country, in between Ghouta, Idlib, Afrin, Raqqa, and the south also. There are the borders with Jordan. These are all areas where, on the humanitarian perspective, of course, we want to be ready to respond should things continue. And in many of these locations, the plans are actually unfolding faster than what we have even done or put as a plan. And so we keep on revising the figures upwards to be able to cope with a very dramatic situation that we see inside Syria. Now, the plan we have, out of 11.3 million Syrians in humanitarian need, we have prioritized 5.6 million who are in what we call acute need. These are the people who are really the most needy of the needy within the country. And we have included on that people who are newly displaced, female-led households, vulnerable groups. It's really the vulnerability criteria that brought us to this 5.6 million people that are in assistance. And to do that, we use all modalities. We have programs inside Syria in what we call regular programs through our office in Damascus and other locations within Syria. We have programs through the neighboring countries, and as you know, we have a Security Council resolution that allows a cross-border from Turkey, from Jordan, and from Iraq, and that's a life-saving operation that we can only reach these people through cross-border. And then we have the cross-line, cross-front line. The cross-line assistance goes from within the government of Syria areas to opposition-held areas. The cross-line is the one that we have the less success in terms of delivering, because it is dependent on the government of Syria approval to be able to cross line. In 2017, we had an approval rate for cross-line operations by the government of Syria to the range of 27%. Of course, for us, this was highly disappointing, because this means that 3/4 of the people who are in what we call hard-to-reach and besiege areas did not receive assistance in 2017 because of the impediment of requiring an explicit authorization to be able to go cross-line. This percentage in 2018 has gone down to 5%, which means that only 5% of the cross-line operations to hard-to-reach and besiege areas were approved. We got approval to move further through that. The other frustration with that is the fact that when we get these approvals, there is a number of items that are not allowed to cross through to be included in the convoy. So medical trauma kits are systematically taken out, a number of medicaments, chlorine tablets. These are all basic life-saving medical items that, of course, we would like to see them there, because in some of these extreme situations, a medical doctor without the trauma kit, a life cannot be saved. So these are really items that we constantly appeal to be able to take. There's about 2.3 million people at the moment who are in the hard-to-reach and besiege area. Ghouta at the moment is still, it's just taken over, so we will be taking it out, obviously, on our list of the besiege areas. There is actually a map that outlines these exact locations that is at the OCHA website, I believe, online, so we can share this as well.
Just a quick follow-up. Is anyone in Duma?
In Duma, there is the people who have remained in Duma, then not everybody has left. And of course, our request is to be able to go inside and provide assistance to the people who have remained in Duma city, but also in other areas within Izghuta. Izghuta, including Duma, had a population of 395,000, was besieged since 2013 until recently. There are some people who were taken out to the 8 transit centers in Damascus. Actually, half of the people who were there were given the clear green light and have left. Some have gone back to their homes or with other relatives. Access is crucial to be able to have in all these locations for us.
Hi, Panos from the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to ask whether you're making any planning or provisional planning for strikes, for U.S. coalition strikes, and what those plans would be in which areas, and whether there's any coordination or any heads up to you about impacted areas.
I mean, from our side, from a humanitarian perspective, we would like to see, obviously, zero hostilities taking place in all areas, and we would like to see, we would like to be able to have access to deliver humanitarian needs in all areas. Our planning, contingency planning assumption and scenario is really more linked to what is happening on the ground. So we haven't really done any specific for a possible scenario. We have enough capacity, I would say, within the country, in the neighboring countries, through the cross-border operation, to be able to adapt and adjust our response on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you for the briefing. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayama from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have 2 questions. First, do you have any staff on ground in Duma that where they can give you feedback on this alleged chemical attack, if you received anything to share it with us? The second question, about 2 months ago, there was a report put together by Oxfam. It accuses both UN and NGOs of asking for sexual favor for exchange of giving food, asking to visit those especially vulnerable women to take the assistant to their homes in exchange for sexual favor. Do you subscribe to that? Can you give us more details about that report? Thank you very much.
Sure. On your first question, our international staff are in Damascus, and when we get a request, usually we put forward an interagency convoy to Duma or to other locations, and often is with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and that's where we go in and out. Now, we do have Syrian NGO partners who have operated inside, including in health facilities, who have come up with a lot of information, of course, in terms of what has happened and evidence of the impact on civilians. So as United Nations, and I think the Secretary General has spoken about that, and there is an effort to do an investigation and to verify what has or hasn't happened, but there is medical teams inside who have worked and treated and seen the response with a lot of information that they have inside, which part of the Syrian NGO partners or partner organizations that have worked in these locations. In terms of the sexual exploitation question by humanitarian workers, this is really an issue that we have taken at the top level in terms of leadership at the field level. Here, of course, the Secretary General, but so the Secretary General has asked, following the allegations and indeed the news reports that came out, to do an internal investigation inside. At the whole of Syria crisis, we have really put in place since last year, I would say, a robust mechanism to make sure that the relation of dignity and trust that we have with the people is respected. It's unacceptable to have any abuse taking place, and we do have a zero policy approach if and when such incidents take place. The person doesn't have a second chance, basically. The person is out instantly, because it is unacceptable to break the trust and the power that really we have as humanitarian workers to be able to assist. We're there not just to assist and to protect. So the protectors cannot become the abusers in the situations on the ground. The prevention of sexual exploitation mechanism, we have put it in place now in all locations in Syria, and it's in the level of, and it includes hotlines, it includes training, it includes code of conduct. It's at different stages of implementation in different locations. Of course, it's an operation where access and security has not been also easy in all locations, but it's one where within the United Nations, but also with our NGO partner colleagues, it's really a very strong zero tolerance, no acceptance. And when incidents come, I really assure you, it's taken very seriously from the leadership and throughout the system, because that's the one thing that is absolutely unacceptable if and when it happens.
Stefano?
Stefano Vaccara, Radio Radicale in Rome, La Voce di New York. You say that the concern of the people when you ask was, the major concern was security, right? Safety. So, do you have a sense of how the people in those places will react to an eventuality of an attack of the US or allies attack after these days? If this happened, do you have a sense from what you have that these people will welcome something, like they will feel like this is a kind of responsibility to protect, although they will be also there close to the bombs, or you think that the people will actually they will not consider this a way to protect them?
I mean, as humanitarian workers, we work on all sides of the conflict. So we have a presence in government-held area, we have presence in opposition-held areas. We're driven by humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, that need really to be able to work on all locations. The civilians, many families, individuals, women, children have really repeatedly told us how they feel the world is not listening, how they feel that the conflict, it's what comes out is almost like a mechanical statistics of numbers. So many people have been killed, so many people have been displaced, and somehow, despite these tragic numbers, despite these incidents after incidents after incidents, they don't see enough change happen in their lives to bring some stability and peace inside Syria and inside to their day-to-day livelihoods and so on. I really cannot speak for the people of Syria. I mean, whether they would welcome or not. All I can say is that, as the Secretary General said this morning, the military options often add to an escalation. And really, I mean, on the humanitarian side, which is really what I can speak about and what our work is focusing, is we feel often a little bit like the fire brigade that runs to set off a fire with the humanitarian crisis that happens on multiple locations at the moment, while clearly what is needed is to address the root cause. And the root cause is political, is really to be able to move to a lasting solution inside Syria, which is really what, sadly, despite various efforts, it has not happened yet. Many of us who worked in previous crises, there is always a moment that we see it as a turning moment. I remember the Sarajevo massacre, or where really it turned around public opinion, it turned around the political process, and it led to a solution. With the Syria crisis, we still wonder when is this going to happen, because we keep on saying it's the 4th anniversary, the 7th anniversary, the numbers keep on adding, the numbers of displacement, suffering keep on continuing, but the solution is really what is not happening.
I'm sorry, just a very short follow-up. I understand, of course, you're not a political advisor here.
Yeah.
For example, you are a humanitarian. So I don't ask you your opinion. I don't ask you. I'm just saying, if you sense it in the people on the ground, they're suffering at the moment, because probably if somebody asks somebody in Rwanda, let's say, or in Bosnia, at one point, they would probably have, expect anything to happen, but not being just a target of whatever wanted to kill them. So my sense is that are we in Syria at this point? You sense that the people feel that? Or they actually fear an escalation means they can get worse just because the war can, can even get worse.
What I can say is that the people of Syria repeatedly tell us how they really would love to see peace and stability, how they really like to go back to normal life, how they would like their children to be able to go to school, health facilities, job, life to resume. And I think that there is a sense of frustration that they get repeatedly displaced, repeatedly, as I said at the beginning, bombed, besieged, really hostilities taking place in multiple locations, resulting to them being displaced. Many of these people who are actually being displaced have been displaced multiple times. They've left their home, they were temporarily in one location, they moved to the next, So there is a strong sense of desperation for a solution, a strong sense of why has the world not supporting us to be able really to move to some sense of normalcy. And I mean, within the United Nations, of course, the hope is to be able to move in a positive way on the political process to a way forward.
Thank you. My name is Masood, head writer of Daily Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. I heard you at top of your briefing that there are some 700,000 Syrians displaced. Do you have any assessment or count of how many these so-called groups or the militant groups like Al-Nusra and so forth operating in that area, and how many have been neutralized, how many still continue to function, and are also killing the Syrians? Do you have any idea how many numbers?
I'm afraid I don't. I think our work is really on the humanitarian side. We're dealing with the consequences of what happens, including in areas where these groups are operating. So our focus is really on the humanitarian and really on the, I don't know.
So basically, you have no idea how many groups are working at cross purposes and are impacting the common Syrian man.
I don't have anything that I can announce or share. Obviously, we try to get a sense of what is happening on the ground. Part of our security assessment, always we engage with everybody to be able to reach people and to be able to help inside. Our focus is entirely on the humanitarian side and, of course, looking at civilians. It's the impact that civilians suffer, including from some of these groups, of course, because, people are caught up in situations where we strongly feel that the basic rule of war is that it happens between militaries and civilians are spared and kept out of it, which is not what has happened in Syria.
So also, just tell me, is it right that you just said that you were only able to raise $13.7 million as against hundreds of millions that are needed?
So out of $3.5 billion, which is the 2018 Humanitarian Response Plan, to this very moment, we have raised 513 million, which is equivalent of 14.6, so almost 15%. So that is too low for April. We should really, at this point, we should have been 2-3 times this number. And this actually, what has happened is this emergency appeals, emergency situations, which requires you to mobilize extra resources. It's more expensive to deal on a newly displaced people, because imagine if you have the buses that have been arriving in Idlib or the people who are displaced in the centers in Damascus, you really have to provide food and shelter, and it's a new displacement. So all this additional displacement, we did not go out with a special appeal above of what the 3.5 billion. We are absorbing it within that space. There is enough space for donors, countries to come to support, and that's why I'm here. That's a key message of the need to see a more robust financial support on the humanitarian side, which is not happened so far.
Betül Yürük with Turkish news agency Anadolu. You mentioned that most of the people in East Ghouta had to go to Idlib. I was wondering if you have the exact number of people who went to Idlib. And I'm also wondering, because some of the people went to the government-controlled areas, and some of them went to Idlib. Were they allowed to choose, or did they leave voluntarily? Thank you.
In terms of the departures from Izruta, there were about at least 60,000 people who left from Izruta towards Idlib. This included fighters and families that were left as part of this evacuation, the famous green buses we have all seen on the road that has taken place. Some of them, the operation was still the last buses from Duma and so on were on the way or just arriving in Idlib. Some were also received the Euphrates Shield area, which we very much welcome. The fact that the Idlib itself is so congested with more than 2 million people, it was really very difficult to be able to find new sites, new locations, to be able to receive. So having some go to the Euphrates Shield was really a positive decision to decongest from there. We have a cross-border operation from Turkey, Bab el-Salam and Bab el-Hawa, also from Jordan and from Iraq. So that route actually was full access to. We had no problem with that, to be able to bring humanitarian assistance to the people who got displaced from Idlib. In government-held areas, the numbers, and I'm looking at Drew in the back, I think was more than 50,000 that were in government-held areas. There were 8 transit centers in Damascus. Most of them really went beyond their capacity. They received, it was really over-congested. There was, again, food, water, medical assistance that is given to them. I understand that more than half of the people who were in the Damascus transit centers have left, have gone to either to their homes or to relatives, or and hopefully we should see this number continue to leave, because the people. A key point we always articulate and demand is the freedom of movement. Is the fact that IDPs should be given the free choice. If they wanted to stay, they should stay. If they should leave, they should leave. Really, bottom line is the decision should be made by them in terms of where to go.
Yeah, hi, Ben Ivansky, Fox News. In your assessment, how much of a failure do you think Resolution 2401 was? And regarding the funding, you mentioned you were making several trips. Are any of those trips going to be in Moscow? Are the Russians giving on the humanitarian front?
Sure. Security Council Resolution 2401 sadly did not get implemented. It was really a resolution where many of us had placed a lot of hope to first and foremost see a cessation of hostilities which did not take place. The 2401 called for a 30-day ceasefire to be able to bring humanitarian assistance and to be able to take out medical evacuations. Bluntly put, it was a failure. It didn't work. It didn't really achieve its objective, and it left a fake hope for many people who thought that the Security Council has finally spoken to be able to alleviate the suffering, and yet it didn't really translate into any action on the ground. The de-escalation areas, if anything, they have been more like re-escalation areas, where we have seen an increase on hostilities, an increase of suffering, an increase of human trauma, including to children. Many of these children will stay with this trauma for the rest of their lives. I've spoken to families who had to spend weeks in dark, humid basements in Ghouta, came out with the children having skin diseases and nightmares about planes, nightmares with what they have experienced, and they still go through that. Part of the support that is given is psychosocial support to help people, to help children to be able to bring this out. So sadly, 2401 actually did not take place. In terms of funding, we definitely knock to every door we can, including the Russian Federation is one of the countries that, we had recently a contribution that came to the OCHA pool funding, but of course the needs are huge, and I think what we need to see is an active engagement on the humanitarian front, on the financial front, to be able to cover the needs. So absolutely knocking as many doors as we can.
Sure, thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. Thanks for doing this briefing. I saw you had, I'm not sure if it was the direct quote was yours, but you were being quoted about the difficulty of counting the number of civilians killed because of the number of jurisdictions or groups even issuing death certificates. So I guess I wanted to know a little bit more. I think the number was 18 different authorities issuing documentation of death, including the Syrian government. Do these include, armed groups, or are there areas of the country where there's no possibility to get a certificate? And I'd also wanted to ask you about, in Afrin, there are these various reports of and this would definitely impact civilians, looting of people's property and residences, including by government-backed militias. What's been done on that? Is it still going on, and who is responsible? Thanks.
Thanks. On your, Matthew, on the first question, when we asked Syrians, from a protection point of view, what are the practical challenges they face, systematically in both various locations, whether it's the north or the south or the east, people talk about the challenge of documentation or the lack of documentation. An identity card is really very important to pass through a checkpoint. It's the one item that everybody keeps on them. If they have to run their home in 1 minute, that's the one thing they take with them. And at the moment in Syria, there are multiple authorities, including non-state actors, local muhtars, local councils, that issue documents. Interesting enough, in all locations in Syria, when we ask people, which document would you rather want to have? They all say the government of Syria, proper one. They see that as kind of the genuine one that needs to be given. So birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, identity cards are very important. And at the moment, it's a total mess because there is multiple authorities, local councils, groups that issue these documents. And of course, people, they would rather have any paper than no paper because many have lost, actually, the original documents, or there's new births and so on. Of course, at the same time, they're worried that if the only paper I have, I present it, and that becomes a protection issue with me because it's been issued by authority, regardless of whether I agree or disagree with it, that becomes an issue. So this is the question of identification, not just in deaths, but also in births and marriages. In civil change status, it's a messy situation that really needs some addressing, and we are looking at it actually to see, as United Nations, what and if we can do at least to take one of the worries off people's minds in terms of, and that's a typical protection issue that we try to move on the ground. In Afrin, and I was in Ankara a few weeks back, there was some reports that came out on looting. I raised it with the government of Turkey authorities, and I received a very quick answer from the Minister of Foreign Affairs on this is an issue that is unacceptable. We are pursuing it. We do not accept any looting, and some incidents that have taken place, we have addressed them both in terms of also of punitive measures for the people who are behind it. Empty properties, safety is an issue that the Turkish armed forces have taken on board. So this is really one of the issues that I raised when I was in Ankara a little bit more than 2 weeks ago. And also we asked to be able to, of course, bring humanitarian assistance. And I was pleased that we had cross-border operation with UN agencies that took assistance from Gaziantep into Afrin town and a number of other villages, and including a needs assessment that was done there. What's important with Afrin is you have 137,000 people who have fled south to Tal Refat and other locations. These are within the government of Syria. Some people have managed to come back. Some people have talked about bribing money to checkpoints and so on to be able to come back. Some have talked about the Kurdish officials not allowing them to leave. So again, the freedom of movement is important. Many families, individuals are worried about their apartments, properties, in particular after the reports on looting and other acts that have reportedly taken place. And this is where I think the cross-border delivery that we had is not just the assistance, it's protection by presence, which is really very important.
Can I just ask one? Is there precedent for the UN being a provider of identity documents? I mean, I think in Kosovo they did do it, and I know in other. I mean, have you looked into this? Is what you're talking about giving people a kind of a UN identity document? At
the moment, is trying to find a solution. So trying to see what is it that will make it really a solution. I mean, providing. Trying to come up with a solution that will work for the people. So it's not necessarily a UN document, but finding a way forward for the challenge that the people are facing on the ground. So I don't have any more specific to announce because this is something in the making that we work as we speak.
Okay. Now our guest has only a little bit of time, so we'll try and take three more questions. I'll group them together. Pam, Abdelhamid, then Anadolu.
Very quickly, just can you say what the numbers are of people that fled Eastern Ghouta as a whole?
Okay. Drew, I'm looking at you. Is it? We need to. I think it's in the range, if I remember correctly. It's that we had a figure of 167,000 people to multiple locations. If we get your numbers to Drew in the back, we could put out something more specific. This is just off the top of my head and might not be the correct one. But the 700,000 I quoted, it includes everybody from East Ghouta, everybody from Idlib, everybody from Afrin, in the last 100 days since the beginning of the year, the 700,000. And this comes on top of the 6.6 million internally displaced people in Syria and 5.5 million refugees to the neighboring countries. So the numbers are quite dramatic.
My question, you might answer it and might not, about Gaza, if that is under your competence.
Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Asif.
معلش.
I'm not, I cover Syria and really not Gaza, so I'm sorry I cannot.
If I could go back to Afrin, you said that some of the people who wanted to return Afrin had to pay bribes. Who asked for bribes from these people?
The bribes, I understand, were asked when trying to leave the Tal Refat area, were on departure from checkpoints, whoever is at checkpoints on the ground. So this is something that from our side, if people want to go home, they shouldn't really have to pay any money on the ground. They should be able to have access back to their property. We're talking about civilians. And when I was in Ankara, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, of course, reaffirmed that civilians should be able to go. People who are not armed, of course, they should be able to go back to their homes. Sadly, with checkpoints, this is something we have seen in multiple locations. We have seen it also taking place in the Kurdish self-administration area in the north of Syria with some of displaced people who have been asked at checkpoints to pay money to move. And that's really unacceptable because families have very little resources. And to give whatever money they have to be able to go to their home or to be able to move to a new location, it's something that should not be happening.
And once again, I'd like to thank our guests. Thank you very much, Mr. Moumtzis. I know you have to
Well,
travel
thank
soon,
you.
so
Thanks for
sparing the
coming,
time.
and yeah, appreciate.
Great. Thanks. Have a good weekend, everyone.